Tonight we go on a journey to the warm, salt-kissed waters of the Gulf of Guinea. Whether you're here to unwind, drift off to sleep, or just learn something quietly in the background, you're in the right place. You don't need to watch the screen. You can close your eyes, turn down the lights, or just let this play softly beside you. If you'd like, you can open a window, let in the night air, or turn on a fan for some soothing white noise. Far from the great roaring highways of the world, there rest two small islands, quiet, green, ancient, São Tomé and Príncipe. A country, but also a kind of dream, drifting off the western coast of Central Africa, just beyond Gabon's maritime boundary. Unknown to many, yet unforgettable once found. Here, the days begin not with sirens or screens, but with birdsong, the soft roll of waves on black volcanic sands, the hush of wind through towering palms. And so tonight, we journey there, not by plane or boat, but through breath and story and stillness. Chapter 1. A place few remember, but none forget. São Tomé and Príncipe is the second smallest country in Africa, both in size and in population. Together, these two islands cover just over 1,000 square kilometers and are home to around 220,000 people. They sit, quiet and proud, some 250 kilometers from the African mainland. Little green specks in a vast Atlantic blue. But these islands hold whole worlds within them, of rainforest, reef, volcano, and memory. Chapter 2. The island's birth, geology and nature. Let us step back, far back, to a time before names, before ships, before memory. The islands of São Tomé and Príncipe were born not of erosion or drifting land masses, but of fire. Molten rock surged up from deep within the earth, forming mountain peaks that rose from the sea floor. This volcanic chain is part of what geologists call the Cameroon Line, a string of volcanoes stretching from the Gulf of Guinea to the heart of Africa. São Tomé rises steeply from the ocean, reaching almost 2,000 meters at its highest point, the peak simply called Pico de São Tomé. Pico Cao Grande, another dramatic spire, juts out of the forest like a tooth of black stone, often shrouded in mist. Príncipe, its smaller sibling, is older and more eroded, but no less enchanting. Its mountains are gentle, its forests ancient. The soil across both islands is rich and dark, volcanic, fertile, humming with life. Rainforests cover much of the interior, fed by warm tropical rain and shaded from harsh sun. These forests are extraordinary. They are home to species that exist nowhere else on Earth. The São Tomé olive pigeon, the Príncipe kingfisher, the São Tomé shrew, tiny lives that evolved in this secluded world. There are over 25 species of endemic birds, many found on only one island. Botanists find joy here too. Mosses, orchids, and towering ferns, some found only on a single hillside. It's little wonder the islands are often called the Galapagos of Africa, so small, yet so full of singular life. Offshore, coral reefs fringe the islands like lace. Dolphins ride the currents, and sea turtles crawl ashore in moonlight to lay their eggs. The waters are rich, not in oil or gold, but in breath, in rhythm, in the slow ballet of marine life. There is a kind of peace in this biodiversity, a balance rarely seen, where people and nature are not yet entirely at odds. Chapter 3. Discovery in the Shadows of Empire. The year was 1470, a quiet year by most measures. But far out in the warm, sunlit waters of the Gulf of Guinea, two Portuguese navigators were drawing closer to something new. João de Santarém and Pero Escobar had been sailing along the coast of West Africa, guided by the stars and the swell of the ocean. Then, ahead of them, land. It rose gently from the sea, deep green and quiet. An island, untouched and unclaimed. Dense forest stretched from the mountains to the shore, and not a soul stirred. They named it São Tomé, in honor of St. Thomas, whose feast day had just passed. A few years later, they found another island, smaller but equally green and wild. They named it Príncipe, the Prince's Island. There were no people here, no cities, no fires, no signs of prior settlement. Unlike most of the African coast, these islands had no known inhabitants, no ruins, no carved stones, just forest, coastline, and silence. To the Portuguese, it was an opportunity, a blank canvas, a place to settle, a place to grow, a place they believed to shape into something useful. At first, there were only a few settlers, small ships, light footprints. But soon, a colony began to take form. Churches were built, crops were planted, and then came the ships, carrying people, not settlers, but the enslaved. Men, women, and children taken from the African mainland, torn from their homes, sold into servitude. They were brought here to cut sugarcane beneath the sun, to work the volcanic soil that had never belonged to them. The plantation spread, and the economy grew, built on their labour and their pain. For centuries, São Tomé and Príncipe were plantation islands. First for sugar, then for cocoa and coffee. And even after slavery was officially abolished, the exploitation continued. Contract workers were brought from Angola and Cape Verde, promised fair work, but often trapped in cycles of debt and hardship. The great plantation houses, called rosas, still stand in many places. Some are grand and overgrown, their tile roofs crumbling, their columns draped in vines. Others have been restored as quiet lodges or museums. They are reminders of the past, beautiful but heavy with history. And yet, even in that history, something else took root. From the blending of cultures came Creole languages, Foro, Angolar, Principense, each one a living memory of survival and adaptation. Songs were sung, drums were played, people danced in ways that remembered the homelands they had lost and imagined futures that might still come. The food, too, carries stories, stews rich in fish and palm oil, fruits from the forest, spices that whisper of the Atlantic crossing, a cuisine born of hardship, now shared with pride. Today, the past lingers quietly. There are no monuments to empire in São Tomé and Príncipe, no towering statues, no bustling museums. But the memory is in the music, in the language, in the way people gather, in the rhythm of everyday life. To visit these islands is to feel that presence, not loud or heavy-handed, but soft and woven into the landscape. The past is here, like the mist that rolls off the mountains in the early morning, not always seen, but always close. The islands were claimed by empire, but they belong, now and always, to those who endured, who shaped culture out of struggle, who built lives in a place once called empty, but that has never truly been so. Chapter 4. The Long Road to Sovereignty. After centuries beneath the weight of Portuguese colonial rule, the winds around São Tomé and Príncipe began to shift. Slowly, quietly, but persistently, like the steady breeze that rustles the palms at sunset. By the mid-20th century, the world was changing. Across Africa, countries were rising to claim their independence. Movements were forming, not with weapons at first, but with words, with ideas, with long-held hopes passed between neighbours and whispered in the shade of rosas. In São Tomé and Príncipe, the path to independence began without fanfare. There was no mass uprising, no widespread violence. The struggle was more subtle, and in many ways more patient. It began with discontent, among labourers on the plantations, among students returning from abroad, among islanders who had long lived under the rule of distant men in Lisbon. In 1953, tensions erupted in a moment that has since been called the Batapá massacre. São Toméans protesting the threat of forced labour were met with brutal repression by colonial authorities. Dozens, some say hundreds, were killed. The pain of that event still lingers, quiet and deep, in the collective memory of the islands. It marked a turning point, a moment when colonial peace cracked, and the longing for sovereignty became harder to silence. In the years that followed, more organised resistance began to take shape. In 1960, exiled islanders founded the movement for the liberation of São Tomé and Príncipe, MLSTP. Though based in nearby countries, its influence slowly spread through the islands. Their goal was clear: full independence. Then came the revolution, not on the islands, but in Portugal. In 1974, a peaceful military coup in Lisbon, known as the Carnation Revolution, overthrew the Estado Novo regime. Portugal's colonial empire, already crumbling, began to collapse. Within months, negotiations were underway to grant independence to São Tomé and Príncipe. And on July 12, 1975, the dream became real. The people gathered in the capital. Flags changed, music played, a nation was born, small, proud, and entirely its own. Manuel Pinto da Costa, a leading figure in the MLSTP, became the first president. The new government adopted a one-party socialist system, modelled in part on other African liberation movements of the time. The mood was hopeful, ideals were high, but challenges lay ahead. The economy was fragile. The islands had few resources beyond their soil. The cocoa plantations, still the economic backbone, were nationalised, but production faltered. Infrastructure was limited. Access to healthcare, education, and electricity remained uneven. In the early years, São Tomé and Príncipe aligned with the Soviet bloc, receiving aid and support from Eastern Europe and Cuba. But as the Cold War shifted and the promise of socialism dimmed, change came again. By the late 1980s, economic hardship and political stagnation led to calls for reform. In 1990, after public pressure and international support, São Tomé and Príncipe held its first multi-party elections. The transition was peaceful, a rare and admirable event in a region where such changes often come with turmoil. Since then, the country has remained democratic, not without tension, but remarkably stable. Power has shifted between parties multiple times. Civil society has grown. The press remains relatively free. In the heart of the Gulf of Guinea, a small island nation has quietly become one of Central Africa's most enduring democracies. But sovereignty here is not just a political fact, it's a feeling. It's in the way people gather beneath the mango trees to talk about the future. It's in the sound of local music drifting through the streets. It's in the pride with which the flag is flown, red, green, yellow and black, with 2 stars for the 2 islands. The long road to independence may have passed, but the quiet work of self-determination continues, gently, every day. Chapter 5. A Portrait of Daily Life. In São Tomé and Príncipe, everyday life unfolds at a gentle pace. With a population of just over 220,000, most of whom live on the larger island of São Tomé, the rhythm of the day is shaped by the land, the sea, and the equatorial sun. The capital city, also called São Tomé, lies along the northeast coast. It is the country's political, economic, and cultural centre. The city is small, with a population of around 70,000, and its colonial-era architecture, low, colourful buildings with tiled roofs, reflects its Portuguese heritage. While there are a few paved roads and some government institutions, much of the city retains a modest, unhurried character. Public services are limited. Electricity supply is often intermittent, especially outside the capital. Water and sanitation infrastructure are improving slowly, but access can still be unreliable in rural areas. Despite these challenges, São Tomé and Príncipe has relatively high rates of literacy, over 90%, and a growing school enrollment rate, supported by a government emphasis on education. Outside the capital, life is predominantly rural. Small towns and villages are scattered across the islands, often nestled among cocoa groves, banana trees, and volcanic hills. Houses are simple, some built from concrete, others from wood, and many are surrounded by small garden plots or coconut palms. Agriculture remains central to daily life. About 70% of the population is engaged in subsistence farming or small-scale agricultural work. The most important crops are cocoa, coffee, coconuts, and palm oil. Cocoa is the country's top export and has been cultivated since the 19th century. While plantations once dominated production, much of the cocoa today comes from smallholder farmers. Efforts to improve processing and promote organic, fair trade chocolate are underway, with support from international partners. Fishing is also vital to the local economy and daily meals. Artisanal fishermen use wooden canoes to catch tuna, grouper, and mackerel close to shore. Fish is typically grilled, smoked, or salted and served with staple foods like breadfruit, plantains, or rice. Tourism is modest but growing. The government has committed to a low-volume, high-value tourism model focused on ecotourism, hiking, birdwatching, and cultural immersion. Visitors stay in small eco-lodges or repurposed plantation houses and often explore the islands with local guides. Most tourists come from Portugal, France, and Angola. Transport remains a challenge. There is only one international airport located on São Tomé with limited weekly flights. Roads vary in quality, and many rural areas are accessible only by motorbike or foot. Príncipe, the smaller island, has its own airstrip and a small population of around 7,000, concentrated in the town of Santo Antonio. Healthcare services are limited. There is one main hospital in the capital and smaller health centers across the islands, but resources, equipment, and personnel are often lacking. For more serious medical needs, travel to Portugal or nearby African countries may be necessary. Despite economic hardships, daily life in São Tomé and Príncipe is anchored by strong community ties. Extended families often live nearby, and neighbors help each other with childcare, farming, and communal celebrations. Music, religion, and shared meals are central to social life. The economy remains fragile and heavily dependent on foreign aid and remittances. However, there is increasing interest in sustainable development, education, and youth entrepreneurship, especially in agriculture and tourism. São Tomé and Príncipe is not a wealthy country, but its people live close to nature with a strong sense of place and resilience. The pace is slow by choice and by necessity, but within that slowness is a life shaped by rhythm, routine, and quiet beauty. Chapter 6: Language, Culture, and Music. The culture of São Tomé and Príncipe is a unique blend of African and Portuguese influences, shaped by centuries of migration, colonization, and adaptation. It is a country where traditions run deep, and where identity is expressed through language, music, food, and daily life. The official language is Portuguese, a legacy of over 500 years of colonial rule. It is the language of government, education, and media. However, many São Toméans also speak one or more Creole languages, which developed during the colonial period through the blending of Portuguese with African linguistic roots. The most widely spoken Creole is Foro, used primarily on São Tomé Island. It originated among the descendants of freed slaves and has become a strong marker of local identity. On the southern coast of São Tomé, the Angola Creole is spoken by the descendants of runaway slaves known as Angolares, who established their own settlements centuries ago. On Príncipe Island, the Principense Creole, known locally as Lungier, is still spoken by some older residents, though it is now considered endangered. These languages are more than just communication tools. They are carriers of oral history, folklore, and cultural memory. Efforts to preserve and revitalize them have been growing, especially through music, education, and literature. Religion plays an important role in cultural life. Around 90% of the population is Roman Catholic, a result of centuries of missionary activity. Churches are prominent in most towns and villages, and Catholic feast days are widely celebrated. There are also small communities of Protestants, Seventh-day Adventists, and Muslims, and a number of traditional beliefs are still practiced quietly, particularly in rural areas. Music is at the heart of social and cultural expression in São Tomé and Príncipe. It reflects the island's Creole identity and has deep African roots mixed with European melodic structures. Traditional musical styles such as usua, deixa, and soko feature rhythmic drumming, call and response vocals, and dancing. These forms are performed at festivals, weddings, and community gatherings, often accompanied by hand-carved wooden drums, guitars, and percussion instruments made from local materials. A notable performance tradition is the Chiloli, a dramatic play that blends 16th century Portuguese theatrical styles with African storytelling and music. It tells a tale of betrayal and justice, passed down through generations, and is performed by all-male troupes in elaborate costumes. Though rooted in colonial-era narratives, it has become a uniquely São Toméan art form, preserved, adapted, and proudly local. A notable performance tradition is the Chiloli, a dramatic play that blends 16th century Portuguese theatrical styles with African storytelling and music. It tells a tale of betrayal and justice passed down through generations and is performed by all-male troupes in elaborate costumes. Though rooted in colonial-era narratives, it has become a uniquely São Toméan art form, preserved, adapted, and proudly local. Popular music includes genres like kizomba, zouk, and cabo love, which are shared with Lusophone African countries such as Angola and Cape Verde. These are often played on radios, at beach bars, and during weekend celebrations. Local musicians blend these styles with traditional rhythms to create a distinctly São Toméan sound. Cultural expression also extends to visual arts, poetry, and storytelling. Murals and paintings in the capital often reflect themes of nature, independence, and Creole identity. Oral traditions are strong, with elders passing down proverbs, folktales, and memories of the island's past. Food is another central aspect of culture, rooted in both the sea and the land. The national dish is kalulu, a slow-cooked stew of fish or meat with vegetables, palm oil, and sometimes okra or dried shrimp. Other staples include breadfruit, plantains, cassava, and grilled fish. Meals are often communal, shared between extended family members and neighbours. While São Tomé and Príncipe may be small, its culture is rich and deeply layered. It is a place where traditions live on, in language, in rhythm, and in the quiet pride of a people who have shaped something lasting from their history. Chapter 7. Nature's Sanctuary. São Tomé and Príncipe is often described as one of the most biodiverse places in Africa, a sanctuary of life perched in the heart of the Gulf of Guinea. Though the country is small, its isolation, volcanic origins, and tropical climate have created conditions for rare ecosystems to flourish. Together, the two islands form part of the Cameroon volcanic line, a chain of volcanic mountains and islands that stretches from mainland Africa into the sea. Over millions of years, the islands emerged from undersea eruptions, and because they were never connected to the mainland, the plants and animals that settled here evolved in near-complete isolation. Today, São Tomé and Príncipe is home to some of the highest rates of endemism in the world, that is, species found nowhere else on Earth. The lush rainforests that cover the mountainous interiors of both islands are alive with sound and colour. On São Tomé Island, the Aubour Natural Park spans over 195 square kilometres. It protects dense primary forest, rivers, waterfalls, and cloud-shrouded peaks, including the country's tallest point, Pico de São Tomé, which rises nearly 2,000 metres above sea level. Príncipe, smaller but older, also boasts its own Aubour Park, a preserved pocket of forest that has remained largely untouched for centuries. It is quieter, more intimate, and rich in biodiversity. The towering volcanic peak Pico de Príncipe looms above the treetops, while narrow hiking trails weave through mist and moss. The flora of the islands includes over 900 species of plants, at least 100 of which are endemic. These range from towering trees and tree ferns to tiny orchids that bloom only once a year in the hidden shadows of the forest. Some plants have only been identified in recent decades, with new species still being discovered. Bird life is especially remarkable. São Tomé and Príncipe is home to over 140 bird species, including more than 25 that are endemic. Among the most celebrated are the São Tomé shorttail, the Príncipe kingfisher, and the elusive São Tomé grosbeak, one of the largest and rarest songbirds in the world. Birdwatchers from around the globe visit these islands to glimpse species that exist in no other place. Reptiles, amphibians, and invertebrates are also abundant, and many are unique to the islands. Giant African land snails, tiny brightly coloured frogs, and shimmering butterflies make their homes among the undergrowth. Marine life along the coasts is equally vibrant, with coral reefs, tropical fish, sea turtles, and dolphins inhabiting the clear coastal waters. Over 30% of the country's land is under environmental protection, a remarkable figure by global standards. This reflects São Tomé and Príncipe's strong commitment to conservation. Both local and international organizations are actively involved in protecting these delicate ecosystems through reforestation projects, species monitoring, and ecotourism initiatives. Tourism here is carefully managed. There are no large resorts or cruise terminals. Instead, visitors are encouraged to experience the islands slowly, on foot, by boat, or through the eyes of local guides. Small eco-lodges, especially on Príncipe, offer sustainable accommodations surrounded by rainforest and sea. Environmental challenges do remain. Climate change poses a threat to biodiversity, especially in the form of rising sea levels, shifting weather patterns, and increasing storm intensity. Invasive species and unsustainable land use can also put pressure on ecosystems. But efforts to protect the natural heritage are ongoing and supported by a strong conservation ethic across the islands. In São Tomé and Príncipe, nature is not something separate from daily life. It surrounds, supports, and shapes everything. The forest is not a backdrop. It is a presence, a deep green breath that moves with the wind and whispers through the canopy. A sanctuary, in every sense of the word. Chapter 8. A nation of firsts and fragility. For all its quietness and small size, São Tomé and Príncipe holds a surprising number of quiet firsts. It is one of the most stable and democratic countries in Central Africa. It has no standing army, it maintains one of the world's lowest carbon footprints, and, though it often slips under the radar of global headlines, it has quietly become a model of peaceful self-governance and environmental awareness in its region. Since transitioning to multi-party democracy in 1990, São Tomé and Príncipe has held regular, peaceful elections. Power has changed hands between opposing political parties multiple times, often without conflict. The press, while small, is relatively free, and political discourse remains open and vibrant. In a region where democratic fragility is common, the islands stand apart as an example of what slow, steady political development can look like. But beneath this admirable calm lies a more complicated reality, one of economic dependence, structural vulnerability, and environmental risk. São Tomé and Príncipe's economy is small and heavily reliant on imports. the country produces few manufactured goods and relies on shipments of food, fuel, medicine, and basic supplies. Its most significant export remains cocoa, followed by smaller volumes of coffee, coconut oil, and fish. Tourism is growing, especially on Príncipe, but it still contributes only modestly to national income. Foreign aid plays a major role in public services and development projects. International donors support everything from road construction to education reform. While this assistance is essential, it also means that the country is deeply tied to the policies and priorities of outside actors. Youth unemployment is high, around 20 to 25% by some estimates, and many young people seek opportunities abroad. The government has invested in technical education and small business support, but challenges remain in creating consistent and sustainable employment. In the early 2000s, offshore oil reserves were discovered in the waters surrounding the islands, leading to high hopes of a financial windfall. São Tomé and Príncipe entered into a joint exploration zone with Nigeria and signed deals with international energy firms. But so far, no commercial-scale oil production has taken place. The potential wealth remains speculative, and the country has instead shifted focus to renewable energy, organic agriculture, and ecotourism as longer-term development strategies. Environmental vulnerability is a growing concern. As a small island state, São Tomé and Príncipe is especially exposed to the effects of climate change. Rising sea levels, saltwater intrusion, and changing rainfall patterns affect both agriculture and infrastructure. Storms are becoming more intense, and coastal erosion is already threatening some low-lying communities. Conservation efforts are strong. Over a third of the land is protected, but these ecosystems are delicate. Biodiversity loss, overfishing, and deforestation remain risks, particularly if tourism or farming practices are not carefully managed. Still, resilience is part of daily life here. Islanders are used to working with limited resources, solving problems locally, and leaning on strong community ties. From fishing cooperatives to village solar projects, many solutions emerge from within. São Tomé and Príncipe also punches above its weight diplomatically. It is an active member of the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, CPLP, and maintains good relations with Portugal, Angola, Brazil, and the European Union. Its voice is quiet on the world stage, but it is steady, often focused on issues like sustainable development, marine protection, and regional peace. In many ways, São Tomé and Príncipe walks a narrow line between tradition and innovation, between independence and interdependence. It is a place of delicate balances, a country of firsts, yes, but also of fragility, of quiet strength, of cautious optimism. A place where progress doesn't shout, but whispers forward, step by gentle step. Chapter 9. Dreams for the Future. As the sun sets over the calm waters of the Gulf of Guinea, casting long shadows through the palm trees and glowing over the red earth, São Tomé and Príncipe feels in many ways timeless. Yet beneath the stillness, the islands are quietly evolving, imagining new futures while holding tightly to the past. It is a small country, yes, but smallness can be a strength. In São Tomé and Príncipe, change does not have to come in sudden waves. It can arrive slowly, like rainfall over the forest canopy, soaking in quietly and steadily. The country's greatest resource may be its young population. More than half of São Toméans are under the age of 25. Across the islands, young people are studying, building businesses, and connecting with the outside world through education, mobile technology, and international exchange. There is growing interest in vocational training, digital entrepreneurship, and sustainable farming, practical paths for building a stable future. Education is expanding. School enrollment has risen steadily, and literacy rates remain among the highest in sub-Saharan Africa. Though resources are limited, Teachers, parents, and local organizations continue working to improve learning outcomes, especially for girls and children in rural communities. In recent years, attention has turned toward the idea of a green economy, one based on sustainability, conservation, and renewable energy. Solar projects are increasing in both urban and remote areas. Small hydroelectric stations help power rural towns.
The country aims to be a model for climate resilience among small island states, balancing development with the protection of its natural resources. There is also promise in ecotourism. Príncipe, in particular, has received international praise for its efforts to develop tourism sustainably. Its UNESCO Biosphere Reserve designation reflects this commitment. Here, visitors are encouraged not just to observe nature, but to respect it, to walk lightly, to learn from locals, and to leave the islands just as they found them. In agriculture, São Tomé and Príncipe has begun producing high-quality organic cocoa, often grown on former plantations that have been converted into cooperatives. These small producers are now exporting specialty chocolate to European markets, telling a different story, one of fair trade, dignity, and heritage. The country's name, once associated with forced labor, is now found on artisan chocolate bars sold in boutiques in Lisbon, Paris, and Berlin. And while oil exploration has not yet brought the wealth once imagined, that too may be a quiet blessing. Without the disruptions and inequalities that sudden oil booms can bring, the country has been able to focus on more balanced forms of growth, where people and ecosystems are both considered part of the equation. Challenges remain. The economy is still fragile. Access to healthcare is limited. Climate change continues to threaten both coastlines and crops, but there is also a growing network of local and international partnerships, from conservation groups and universities to cultural foundations and youth-led initiatives, all investing in the country's future. Perhaps São Tomé and Príncipe's greatest strength lies in its sense of identity. Its people know who they are, shaped by history, rooted in land and language, connected by community, and carried forward by hope. They are not in a hurry to become something else. They are building slowly, thoughtfully, on their own terms. In the years ahead, the islands may not change dramatically. They may not see skyscrapers or highways or factories, but they may grow in ways that matter more, in self-sufficiency, in opportunity, in harmony. And so, São Tomé and Príncipe drifts gently toward the future, one foot in the forest, one in the sea. A small nation with a steady voice, charting its course across calm waters, not rushed, not loud, but certain and quietly proud.